Here we are, readers, for the final reading and the ending of The Tale of Despereaux. Chapter 48, On the Tail of a Rat. Have you ever had to hold the tail of a rat? At best, it is an unpleasant sensation, scaly and cold, similar to holding on to a small, narrow snake. At worst, when you are dependent upon a rat for your survival, and when a part of you is certain that you are being led nowhere except to your own death, it is a hideous sensation indeed to have nothing but a rat's tail to cling on to. Nonetheless, Despereaux held on to Botticelli Ramusio's, and the rat led him deeper and deeper into the dungeon. Despereaux's eyes had, at this point, adjusted quite well to the darkness, though it would have been better if they had not. For the things he saw made him shiver and shake. What did he see? He saw that the floor of the dungeon was littered with tufts of fur, knots of red thread, and skeletons of mice. Everywhere there were tiny white bones glowing in the darkness, and he saw in the dungeon tunnels through which Botticelli led him the bones of human beings too. Grinning skulls and delicate finger bones rising up out of the darkness and pointing towards some truth best left unspoken. Despereaux closed his eyes, but it didn't help. He saw as if his eyes were still wide open. The bones, the tufts of hair, the knots of thread, the despair. Exactly, said Botticelli, laughing as he negotiated through the twists and the turns. Oh, yes, exactly. If what was in front of Despereaux was too horrible to contemplate, what followed behind him was perhaps even worse. Rats. Happy, hungry, vengeful, preyed of rats. Their noses up in the air, sniffing, sniffing. Mouse! Sang out a rat joyfully. Oh, yes, a mouse, agreed another one. But something else too. Soup! Cried another rat. Yes, soup, the others agreed. Blood, sang the rat. Blood, they all sang together. And then they started singing, Here, mousy, 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 here, little mousy. Botticelli called out to the other rats. Mine, he said. This little treasure is all mine, ladies and gentlemen. Please, I beg you, do not infringe on my discovery. Mr. Ramusio, said Despereaux. He turned and looked behind him, and he saw that the rats, their red eyes and their smiling mouths. He closed his eyes again. He kept them closed. Mr. Ramusio, he shouted. Yes, said Botticelli. Mr. Ramusio, said Despereaux, and he was crying now. He couldn't help it. Please, the princess. Tears, shouted the rat. We smell tears, Mousie, we do. Please, shouted Despereaux. Here he is, holding on to Botticelli's scaly tail with the locket in Botticelli's hands and then the other rats behind them. Listen, little friend, said Botticelli. Little Despereaux-tillings, I promised you, and I always keep a promise. The rats stopped. Look ahead of you. What do you see? He said. Despereaux opened his eyes. Light, he said. Exactly, said Botticelli. Light. Chapter 49. What do you want, Miggery Sow? Again, readers, we must go backwards before we go forward. We must consider for a moment what had occurred with the rat and the serving girl and the princess down in the dungeon before Despereaux made his way to them. What happened was this. Roscero led the P and Mig deep into the dungeon to a hidden chamber, and there he directed Mig to put the princess in chains. "Gaw," said Midge. "She's going to have a hard time learning her lessons if she's all chained up like that." "Do as I say," said Roscaro. "Maybe," said Mig, "before I lock her up, her and me could switch outfits so we could start in already on her being me and me being a princess." "Oh, yes," said Roscaro. "Certainly a wonderful idea, Miss Miggery. Princess, take off your crown and give it to the serving girl." The pea sighed and took off her crown and handed it to Mig. Mig put it on, and it slid immediately right down her small head and came to rest quite painfully on her poor abused ears. "It's a biggish thing," she said, "and painful like." "Well, well," said Roscaro. "How do I look?" Mig asked, smiling at him. "Ridiculous," he said. "Laughable." Mig stood blinking back her tears. You mean I don't look like a princess?" she said to the rat. "I mean," said Roscaro, "you will never look like a princess, no matter how big of a crown you put on that tiny head of yours. You look exactly like the fool you are and always will be. Now, make yourself useful and chain the princess up. Dress time is over." Mig sniffed and wiped her eyes, and then bent to look at the pile of chains and locks on the floor. "And now, princess," he said, "I'm afraid that the time for your truth has arrived. I will now tell you what your future holds. As you consigned me to darkness, I consign you too to a life spent in the dungeon." Mig looked up. "Ain't you going to go upstairs and be my serving maid?" "No," said Roscaro. "Ain't I going to be the princess then?" "No," said Roscaro. "But I want to be the princess." "No one," said Roscaro, "cares what you want." And as you know, readers, Miggery Sow had heard that sentiment expressed many times in her short life. But now in the dungeon it hit her with full force. The rat was right. No one ever cared what she wanted. And perhaps, worst of all, no one would ever care. "I want," said Mig. "Shh," said the princess. "Shut up," said the rat. "I want," sobbed Mig. I want. "What do you want, Mig?" the princess asked softly. "Huh?" shouted Mig. "What do you want, Miggery Sow?" the princess shouted. "Don't ask her that," said Roscaro. "Shut up, shut up!" But it was too late. The words had been said, the question at last had been asked, and the world stopped spinning, and all of creation held its breath, waiting to hear what Miggery Sow wanted. "I want," said Mig. "Yes," said the pea. "I want my mama," cried Mig into a silent, wailing, waiting world. "I want my mom." "Oh," said the princess, and she held out her hand to Mig. Mig took hold of it. "Oh, I want my mother too," the princess said softly, and she squeezed Mig's hand. "Stop it!" shouted Roscaro. "Chain her up! Chain her up!" "Gaw," said Mig. "I ain't gonna do it." Here's Mig and the princess. You can see how glowing the princess is. And poor Mig and the rat with the spoon on top of his head and all the balls and chains. "I ain't gonna do it. You can't make me do it. I got the knife, don't I?" And she took the knife and she held it up. "If you have any sense at all," said Roscaro, "and I hardly doubt you do, you will not use that instrument on me. Without me, you'll never find your way out of the dungeon, and you'll starve to death down here, or worse." "Cool. Then lead us out right now, or I'll chop you up into little rat bits," said Mig. No, said Roscaro. The princess shall stay here in the darkness, and you, Mig, will stay here with her. But I won't go back upstairs, said Mig. I'm afraid we're stuck here, Mig, shouted the princess, unless the rat has a change of heart and decides to lead us out. There will be no change of hearts, said Roscaro. None! Oh, Mig said and lowered the knife. And so the rat, the princess, and the serving girl sat in the dungeon together. Outside the castle, the sun rose and moved through the sky and sank into the earth again, and night fell. They sat together until the candle burned out and another one was lit. They sat together in the dungeon. They sat and sat and sat. And readers, truthfully, they might still be sitting there, still, if a mouse had not arrived. Chapter 50, in which the princess says his name. Princess! Shouted Despereaux. Princess, I've come to save you! Princess P heard her name and she looked up. Despereaux? She whispered, and then she shouted, Despereaux! Oh, readers, nothing is sweeter in this sad world than the sound of someone you love calling your name. Nothing. For Despereaux, the sound was worth everything. His lost tail, his trip to the dungeon and back out of it and back into it again. He ran towards the princess, but Roscaro, baring his teeth, blocked the mouse's way. The princess cried, Oh no, Rat, please, don't hurt him. He's my friend. Mig said, Don't worry, princess. I'll save the mousey. And she took the kitchen knife. She aimed to cut off the rat's head, but she missed her mark. Whoopsie! She shouted. What do you think she cut? Chapter 51. What is that smell? Ow! Roscaro screamed. He turned to look where his tail had been, and as he did, Despereaux drew his needle and placed the sharp tip at right where the rat's heart should be. Don't move, said Despereaux. I will kill you. Botticelli laughed from the sidelines. Exactly. He slapped his tail on the floor in approval. Absolutely delightful. A mouse is going to kill a rat. Oh, all of this is too much. Way much more than I anticipated. I love it when the mice come to the dungeon. And here's our brave mouse holding up the sword, aimed right at Roscaro's heart. Oh, you can see the rat's tail. See that in the background, a little bit behind him? Ouch. Let me see. Other rats pushed and shoved. Stand back, Botticelli ordered them, still laughing. Let the mouse do his work. Despereaux held the trembling needle against Roscaro's heart. The mouse knew that as a knight, it was his duty to protect the princess. But would killing the rat really make all the darkness go away? Despereaux bowed his head ever so slightly, and as he did, his whisker brushed against the rat's nose. Roscaro sniffed. What is that smell? He asked. Mousy blood, shouted a rat. Bones and blood, shouted another rat. You smell tears, said Botticelli. Tears and thawed love. Exactly, said Roscaro. And yet there's something else. He sniffed again. Oh, and the smell of the soup crashed through his soul like a giant wave, bringing with it the memory of the light and the chandelier and the music and the laughter, everything, all things that were not and never would be available to him as a rat. Soup? Said Roscaro. Oh, and he began to cry. Boo! Hissed Botticelli. Hiss, said the other rats. Kill me, said Roscaro, and he fell down before Despereaux. It will never work. All I wanted was some light. That is why I brought the princess here, really just to get some beauty and some light of my own. Please, shouted Botticelli, do kill him. He is a miserable excuse for a rat. No, Despereaux, said the princess, don't kill him. Despereaux lowered his needle. He turned and looked at the pea. Boo, said Botticelli. Kill him, kill him. All this goodness is making me sick. I have lost my appetite. Go, shouted Mig, waving her knife. I'll kill him. No, wait, said the princess. Roscaro, she said to the rat. What? He said. Tears were falling out of his eyes and creeping down his whiskers and dripping onto the dungeon floor. And then the princess took a deep breath and put her hand on her heart. I think, readers, that she was feeling the same thing that Despereaux felt when he faced his father, begging him for forgiveness. That is, P was aware suddenly of how fragile her heart was and how much darkness was inside it, fighting always with the light. She did not like the rat. She would never like the rat. But she knew what she must do to save her own heart. And so, here are the words the princess spoke to her enemy. She said, Roscaro, would you like some soup? The rat sniffed. Don't torture me, he said. I promise, said the princess, that if you lead us out of here, I will get cook to make you some soup, and you can eat it in the banquet hall. Speaking of soup, give us the mousey, shouted a rat. Yeah, hand over the mouse, shouted another one. Who would want him now? Said Botticelli. The flavor of him is ruined. All that forgiveness and goodness. Ugh, I, for one, am leaving. Soup in the banquet hall? Roscaro asked the princess. Yes, said the pea. Really? Truly, I promise. Go! Ain't soup illegal? Said Mig. But soup is good, said Despereaux. Yes, said the pea, isn't it? The princess bent down before the mouse. You are my knight, she said to him with a shining needle. And I am so glad you found me. Let's go upstairs and eat some soup. And readers, they did. Chapter 52. Happily ever after. But the question you wanted answer, I know, is that did they really live happily ever after? Yes and no. What of Roscaro? Did he live happily ever after? Well, the princess gave him free access to the upstairs of the castle, and he was allowed to go back and forth from the darkness of the dungeon to the light of the upstairs. But alas, he never really belonged in either place. A sad fate, I'm afraid, for those whose hearts break and then mend in a crooked way. But the rat, in seeking forgiveness, did manage to shed some light, some happiness into another life. How? Roscaro, readers, told the princess about the prisoner who had once owned the red tablecloth, and the princess saw to it that that prisoner was released, and Roscaro led the man up out of the dungeon to his daughter, Miggery Sow. Mig, as you might have guessed, did not get to be the princess. Oh, but her father, to atone for what he had done, treated her like a princess for the rest of his days. And what of Despereaux? Did he live happily ever after? Well, he did not marry the princess, if that's what you mean by happily ever after. Even in a world as strange as this one, a mouse and a princess cannot marry. But, readers, they can be friends. And they were. Together, they had many adventures. Those adventures, however, are another story, and this story, I'm afraid, must draw to a close. But before you leave, readers, imagine this. Imagine an adoring king and a glowing princess and a serving girl with a crown on her head and a rat with a spoon on his, all gathered around a table in the banquet hall. In the middle of the table was a great kettle of soup. Sitting in place of honor right next to the princess is a very small mouse with big ears. And peeking out from beneath a dusty velvet curtain, looking in amazement at this scene before them, were 4 other mice. Mon Dieu, look, look, says Antoinette. He lives, and he seems such the happy mouse. Ah, forgiveness, whispered Lester. Cripes, said Furlong. Unbelievable. Just so, said the threadmaster Hoovis, smiling. Just so. And readers, it is just so. Isn't it? The end. Here is the princess and the adoring king with Despereaux. The rat is to the back of the princess's shoulder. And here is Despereaux's family. I hope you have really enjoyed listening to the tale of Despereaux.